Well, everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer. Welcome to the Wasteland, my weekly show where I take a deep dive into a particular film. And we are in the twilight of my John Ford series. We only have 2 months left, and we'll be talking about the horse soldiers for this episode. And joining me is my good friend Griff. Griff, thank you so much for coming on.
Shane, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You've been on this John Ford adventure with me for a while now. This is going to be over a year and a half by the
Wow.
time I'm done this. I was committed and we accomplished it. We're so close. But for those who haven't tuned into the show before, we always do coming attractions to lead off the show. So this comes out November 8th. So we'll have some coming attractions for you. And then we'll wrap up the show with some recommendations. But for the weekend of the 8th, we have a couple of Christmas type films, some action thrillers, but one particular A24 horror film that we're both excited about, and that is Heretic. And Griff, what excites you about Heretic?
Not only because it's an A24 movie, but because I'm curious to see how Hugh Grant goes about playing a villain, which we're definitely not used to seeing him as that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time in his career now with like Paddington 2 and Cloud Atlas and even like more anti-hero or like just unsavory type roles in like The Gentleman and stuff like that. Hugh Grant's really leaning into I'm a aging middle-aged man and I can be a little devious and oh, the trailers for Heretic sold me so hard. I'm like I cannot wait to watch Hugh Grant sink his teeth into whatever kinds of mayhem he has up his sleeve for these two young Mormon women who come to the wrong house trying to sell the Book of Mormon. And I actually got to see a press screening of this early, and it is something. So I'm looking forward to you getting a chance to check that out too, Griff. But this definitely was by far the most anticipated movie for me as well, ever since the trailers dropped for this. This was honestly one of my probably my second most anticipated movie the rest of this year behind Nosferatu. So
Yeah.
it's been a great year for horror. There are a few fun films to look out for this month as well, and I'll be talking about Gladiator 2 and Wicked on a future episode for coming attractions. But this one, we'll see how Heretic connects with people. But there's a little bit of everything for everybody for this coming weekend. But getting into our feature film, it is 1959's The Horse Soldiers. And in 1863, a Union outfit is sent behind Confederate lines in Mississippi to destroy enemy railroads, but a captive Southern belle and the unit's doctor cause frictions within the ranks. And I have a little bit of backstory here. So, this is indeed a Civil War film starring John Wayne and William Holden, loosely based on a Harold Sinclair's 1956 novel. It's a fictionalized version of Grierson's raid from 1863, which saw them cutting across the Mississippi River and Vicksburg. Both Wayne and Holden each got paid $750,000 for this movie, which was unheard of at the time. So they made some bank here. This was a tumultuous shoot with Wayne was apparently really distracted prepping the Alamo, so he wasn't completely there. And Wayne and Holden fought constantly on set. And even a veteran stuntman, Fred Kennedy, broke his neck on set, which caused a lot of friction. And this film wound up being a box office failure for the studio after its budget kept ballooning through shooting and also between the fact that they paid two of their leads $1.5 million between the two of them in 1959, which is crazy amount of money. But Griff, what are your general thoughts on the Horse Soldiers?
The first time I saw the Horse Soldiers, I was in middle school. I actually recorded it off of TBS on a video cassette long before I
Nice.
bought it on DVD. What stood out to me the most about the Horse Soldiers was it was the first time I ever heard of William Holden. I was a huge John Wayne fan before that,
Mhm.
but I never heard of William Holden. And after I saw the Horse Soldiers, I became a big fan of William Holden after that, watching The Wild Bunch and
Mhm.
Network, Sunset Boulevard, and all those other great movies that he made. And it's actually too bad that The Horse Soldiers is the only movie Wayne and Holden made together
Mhm.
because they actually were good friends. They both really admired each other.
Well, and I'm a big William Holden fan, and I'm a huge Sunset Boulevard fan. Bridge on the River Kwai, I think,
Yeah.
was the first film that I saw William Holden in. Um, and he's so great in that. And even like all the way up until Network, where he's an aging actor and still had it,
Hmm.
for sure. And his dynamic in this, it's a very interesting, different kind of presence that he brings as an actor compared to John Wayne, because like John Wayne's like the big swaggering kind of presence, and like there's a lot of power there, and William Holden brings this sense of like confidence behind what he's doing, and it's not like a swagger to him, but there's definitely a charisma behind his performance, and they work poorly together in the best way for this movie, because there's supposed to be that tension between these two characters, and you could definitely feel that tension going on. And I think they have the most interesting dynamic of this film is that they're coming from very different perspectives. Like John Wayne's character is very dismissive of him even showing up at the beginning. He's like, "You cut down my artillery to make me move faster, than you strap me down with this doctor." And
Hmm.
so like he's not happy about it. You can tell William Holden's character has a very different perspective on how things are supposed to go. And it's very much that soldier's mindset versus that doctor mindset in terms of war and on the battlefield. And it adds an interesting dynamic to the film.
Hmm. Yeah, and with Holden's character, unlike Wayne's character, Holden seems to care about everybody on both
Yep.
sides, while Wayne's character only cares about the Union.
Absolutely. And, you know, that's very much his perspective in terms of like he's saddled with this job of like, we need to cut the Confederacy off where it needs to be. And it's that I'm here to win. And William Holden's job is to treat people.
Yeah.
And no matter which side they're on, like he needs to be there to treat them. I think the idea of this Southern woman kind of spy type character is an interesting element to this film. I didn't really I didn't buy into the romance as much in terms of like how that progressed into the film, but I feel like her presence in the film was interesting enough from that perspective, because especially like when they're at her house and they're like trying to have secret meetings, she's listening in.
Yeah.
And like those kinds of elements, I think, added some intrigue to this that you wouldn't really expect out of a whole lot of war films from that era, especially like the war films I've watched from John Wayne. It's very much like these are the men, these are the soldiers that are in the thick of it. And she's kind of taking some things into her own hands in an interesting way. And I think that adds something different to the film.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't the John Wayne Maureen O'Hara type of romance.
And no, certainly not. And it did not, well, they didn't always start off very chipper with each other either. Think of like the Quiet Man and stuff like that. But it's a very different kind of dynamic. And she's kind of like plopped in the center of this whole Holden and Wayne kind of dynamic. Now, something that stood out to me watching this film was, not gonna lie, the past couple of John Ford films that I watched, I wasn't really impressed from a directing standpoint. There definitely seemed to be a lull post like The Searchers in terms of some of his films feeling very like workmanlike in terms of their direction and not feeling very dynamic. And I was pleasantly surprised to see some of those more like dynamic camera choices and stuff like that coming back into this, like the push shots of like I remember one particular one, this camera push on into this fence and you see into the distance these soldiers coming and you're like, danger, we don't like that. And just even like those little kinds of choices in terms of how to present the camera and stuff like that, it kind of felt like, oh wow, John John Ford still has a little bit of that juice left in him.
Hmm. Yeah, when the horse soldier script was given to Ford, he said, I'm not going to film it this way because he thought the original story was too similar to Battleground, the World War II drama that was directed by William Wellman. He said the
Mhm.
story's been done a bunch of times before. I don't want to do it. He actually had a lot of respect for William Wellman, so he decided to
Mhm.
change a few things around with it. And it was also personal for him because his physician told him to abstain from drinking. So he said to John Wayne, "Don't you go drinking too?" And so, what do you know? He and William Holden end up going to New Orleans and getting drunk, which infuriated Ford, understandably so.
Imagine so. Which it's like going down and shooting that close in New Orleans. It's kind of like they were probably like, well, we have to go. And
Yeah.
John Ford's like, no, you didn't. And it's there's some interesting elements to this film too, because there's this whole entire sequence where you had like this school like marching. There were a bunch of like teenagers and stuff like that. And that made for a really interesting sequence because like, do they fire on them? Like these are kids, and then they're shooting at the Union and stuff like that. And there's some like really well constructed, well shot kind of battle sequences in this film for sure. And, you know, it's a very different kind of actions and thrills because you're so used to seeing like John Ford films like out in the West and stuff like that. Even
Hmm.
some of the war films, a lot of the cavalry films are out in the desert and stuff like that. This was an interesting kind of thing seeing like in the woods and in the fields and stuff like that.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. John Ford's only Civil War movie, and then later on, when they made How the West Was Won, he directed that.
Yeah,
That Civil War scene where Wayne was General Sherman and Harry Morgan was General Grant.
absolutely. I guess, Griff, what other things stood out to you about the film that you wanted to mention?
Well, I noticed a couple of historical inaccuracies. That one scene
Hmm.
where William Holden's riding and he's wearing a yellow rain jacket. I don't think they had yellow rain jackets at that time. And I noticed too that one of the weapons they used were Springfield trapdoor rifles, which was inaccurate because that particular weapon came out 10 years after the Battle of Vicksburg. The Springfield trapdoor rifle used a metallic cartridge, which the rifles they would have used would have been, muzzle loaders with the percussion cap. And also, Andersonville, the prison camp, was mentioned a couple times.
Hmm.
During that time, Andersonville didn't exist. I mean, of course, there were prison camps, but Andersonville wasn't founded until the year after Vicksburg in 1864.
There you go. John Ford's like, well, this is more dramatic this way.
Yeah.
Throw some things in there. Um, I think one thing too that stood out to me, one particular sequence that I think really hit in this film and really captured that conflict between Wayne and Holden's characters was you had that one particular character who he like took off the scabbing on his leg and was just like, hey, it was itching and stuff like that. It's like, no, dummy, like that was you healing.
Hmm.
And it gets into that like he was gonna have to amputate him, and that soldier wound up passing away. And that was a pretty heavy moment because he was a pretty consistent character
Yes.
popping in throughout the film. And you could definitely feel the tension and the emotion in that moment between uh Wayne and Holden's characters. And they came to blows with each other, which also like I love William Holden, but I would not get in a fist fight with John Wayne.
Nah, nah.
Not a small man for sure. And I feel like that was really like the climax of that conflict between them. And there was a lot of emotion and impact to that sequence of the film too.
Hmm. And I was especially curious, about the ending. You wonder, does he make it to Baton Rouge? Does he not make it to Baton Rouge? Does the Holden, ultimately become a prisoner of war?
It's a I would my guess is that he probably does become a prisoner of war. And because like seems very like resigned to the fact that like, hey, my job here is to heal people. And you see that in terms of like them stopping to help like that young black woman give birth at one point.
Yeah.
It's like he doesn't really care. And I think he would be willing to give himself up into that situation if it meant him being able to help people. And that's his journey. Um the whole John Wayne of it. I don't know. And that's a challenging thing because like he wasn't in the best shape at that point and like uh I think it was an interesting choice leaving that a little bit leaving that ambiguous in terms of like is he going to make it or not. He certainly made it through a lot. He definitely gives that kind of vibe of a character that's like he's seen a lot of stuff and always seems to find a way to survive. So I wouldn't be shocked if he did make it.
Hmm. I also read that I didn't know this at the time
Hmm.
that they were originally thinking of Clark Gable for John Wayne's role and Jimmy Stewart for William Holden's role, but then the producers decided, now let's go for Wayne and Holden instead.
Obviously, very different kind of personalities in
Right.
both of those castings. I would have been interested to see a Wayne Stewart combo. And it's interesting because like if you were gonna tell me who would play a doctor in a Civil War movie, I'd 100% cast the Jimmy Stewart type instead of a William Holden type. But how his personality came through with that, I could definitely see that tension though in between like Ford and Stewart. Gable's an interesting choice. I could see like the confidence and stuff like that, but I don't know if he there's a very specific kind of person that John Wayne's character is supposed to be, and John Wayne embodies that very well.
I
He's big,
agree.
he's swaggering, he's like that invincible type. You look at him, it's like nothing's gonna happen to this guy. And that's what makes it so much more impactful towards the end of the film, where things are going wrong in terms of stuff. That's some interesting casting though, but I definitely could see it would have been a different dynamic, but I definitely would have liked to see that for the John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart dynamic for this though.
Hmm. Yeah, but of course they succeeded, 3 years later with The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
Yep. Jimmy Stewart wound up doing a lot of westerns, for sure.
Yeah, he definitely made some of my favorite westerns: Winchester 73, The Far Country, Bend of the River, Night
Mhm.
Passage. The the only western that Jimmy Stewart made that in like was The Rare Breed. Him, Maureen O'Hara, and Brian Keith. I thought it was weak compared to his other westerns.
I haven't seen a whole lot of them. Am I remembering correctly that he was in The Shootist?
He was in The
Yeah.
Shootist. He played the doctor who gives
Yeah.
Wayne's character his diagnosis, but he only had three, maybe four scenes in the whole movie.
I thought that was very fitting though.
Yeah,
Having the two of them together for the shootist, which would be like John Wayne's big like swan song of a film.
exactly.
But it's very interesting. And it's interesting getting to the end of all of this and wondering like which one of these is John Wayne's last John Ford movie. Because like I can't imagine what it would have felt like for John Wayne getting to that point where like your whole entire career has been working with this man. Obviously, he did a lot of other films with other directors, but like he's consistently been in John Ford films since like the 30s, and still getting to see him in some of these roles. It feels good getting to see like him bring some of these characters to life, though.
Mhm.
But Griff, any other final thoughts about the Horse Soldiers?
I thought it was a good movie. I didn't think it was a dud like a lot of people said it was, but having said that, there's definitely better Civil War movies out there like Glory and Gettysburg, even
Mhm.
miniseries like North and South with Patrick Swayze. And there's this other Civil War miniseries called The Blue and the Gray with Lloyd Bridges, Stacy Keach, and Gregory Peck as Abraham
Interesting.
Lincoln. That one I highly recommend.
Interesting. This is for middle of the pack for me in terms of the John Ford films that I've watched, but there's a lot of really good pieces to it. And like I mentioned before, like the romance wasn't something that like really connected with me in terms of this, but
No.
that whole dynamic between Wayne and Holden really makes this movie and some really fine filmmaking from John Ford too.
Mhm.
But yeah, so now we got some recommendations for everybody, and I mentioned one particular sequel that's going to be coming out, and Griff just rewatched the original. So Griff, what would you like to recommend to everybody?
Gladiator. I watched it mainly because Gladiator 2 is going to be coming out.
Mhm.
And I hadn't seen the first movie in a long time, so I just wanted to watch it again. And I forgot how great of a movie it is.
Oh, I'm a huge fan of Gladiator, and Griff and I are going to be having some fun on my talk show, related to Gladiator, and you'll have to go check that out. But it's definitely a film that has aged really well in the past 24 years since it came out, which is crazy. That's been almost 25 years since Gladiator came out. And Russell Crowe is one of my favorite actors. And he just added so much to that character of Maximus. And it's such a thrilling film, whether it's him or Love Oliver Reed. Obviously, very tragic that he died before the ending, before he could finish filming the rest of his film, because Proxima wasn't supposed to die in the
Right.
film, but they had to, do some movie magic to make that all work.
And from what I understand too, at the end of the movie, when Jaimin Hansu says, "I'll see you again, but not yet," that was supposed to be Proximo. That was going to say that.
That makes a lot of sense, but I do really like that moment for Daijin Hansu's character, for sure. But it's such a big, sprawling, epic film, and I can't wait to see what Ridley Scott did with the sequel, with updated technology and all kinds of stuff, and looks like a really great cast. Russell Crowe's feeling a little left out, apparently. It's just like, but you don't. Maximus is dead. Um, I don't know if you heard about what the original sequel idea was for it, but apparently it was Maximus fighting the gods in the afterlife, and I'm like, and we didn't get that. Oh, that would have been crazy. It would have been a crazy sequel. I have two recommendations that I would like to make. One of which is a new film, and I just watched it today, and that is Anora, which won the Palme d'Or at Cannes Film Festival this year from director Sean Baker, who made Tangerine and The Florida Project and Red Rocket. And Mickey Madsen gives a fantastic performance as this young sex worker who winds up on a whim marrying a rich kid of a Russian oligarch. And things go sideways. This goes from like edgier Pretty Woman to like After Hours kind of crazy, not so dark comedy thriller. It's something really interesting and was definitely one of the best films I've seen this year. So I would highly recommend. And then another, which it's weird calling this one of my movies that I own, but I did rewatch Furiosa for the third time this year.
Yeah, yeah,
Saw that
of
in
course.
saw that in theaters twice, and then watched it on my um just bought the 4K, hadn't arrived yet, so I watched it on Max. It was my the Wasteland review request this month. My friend Haley recommended it, and that wound up being the winner. So you could read my article about it coming out on my website. But it's just for third time watching it, it's just been creeping up my list of top films from this year. Each time I watch it, I get a lot more appreciation for it, and just how amazing George Miller directs action. It's
That's
absolutely
awesome.
incredible. Anya Taylor-Joy is amazing. Chris Hemsworth, probably my favorite villain performance of the year as the Lord Dementus with his giant snoz and his crazy Australian accent. Chris Hemsworth just had way too much fun making this movie. Um, I want more. I want more from The Wasteland, but unfortunately, this one didn't make money. And I don't think Warner Brothers is going to greenlight another one. But I could wish.
Yeah, when I saw Furiosa, I was the only one in the movie theater. And I remember seeing the trailer and I'm thinking, how's Chris Hemsworth gonna, pull this off being a villain? Because we're so used to, Thor and when he was in
Yeah,
Red Dawn and, playing action heroes like that. But yeah, you're right, Shane. He was a fantastic villain, definitely exceeded my expectations.
I legitimately think it's probably the best performance he's given.
Hmm.
And I like that bar isn't super high because he's given some really good performances. There's a couple that as Thor, I think were really, really impressive. I think the best he's been as Thor was probably in Avengers Infinity War, where he
Right.
got a lot of like real emotional weight to deal with in that. But like he hasn't had a whole lot of roles to really like sink his teeth into something really meaty. He had Rush and
Yeah,
like he
Rush was
played
really good.
yeah, he had a villain role in Bad Times at the El Royale, and this kind of felt like he walked in that movie so he could run in Furiosa and make a crazy over the top villain. And just every the for the third time watching this, that final confrontation between um Furiosa and Dementis just hits so hard. And just the two of them are so fantastic in the film too. So yes, I will watch Furiosa again probably soon because I'm just like, if you couldn't tell from my branding, I love Mad Max movies. So there you go.
Yeah.
But Griff, thank you so much for coming on and chatting your last John Ford movie with me. This is getting to the sad part where like we've been on this journey for so long, and yeah, this is the last one. So, but thank you, Griff.
You're welcome, Shayna. Oh, and also, I forgot that Hemsworth was the villain in Bad Times at El Royale. I would recommend that movie too, especially if you're a Quentin Tarantino fan, because a lot of that dialogue is Tarantino-esque.
Yep, I have my 4K of Bad Times up there somewhere. Oh, I that was one of my favorite movies of what was that 2018 that came out. It was either 2017 or 2018, but oh, that one just really hit for me, and he was so fantastic in that too. But thank all of you out there for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland reviewer.